Okay, hi everyone. My name is Karan. I'm a computer engineering student at Boğaziçi University. It's my last year. I also work as student teaching assistant at CmpE352. And today I want to show you some examples. I mean, how to Dockerize a Django application actually. And meanwhile, I want to show some Docker commands. I strongly believe that they are going to be very useful to you during the Dockerization of your practice application. Also for your CmpE451, also for your software engineering life. Okay, let me show how to Dockerize the Django application from scratch. By the way, I have a document here, collection of like some commands, Dockerfile example, Docker commands, and so on. I can share it with you as well. I will be referring to here as far as I can. So let me create a folder first, Django. I will be using Visual Studio Code. Let's open the folder. Okay, first things first, let us create a Python environment, right? Because like we want to keep track of what we are installing in a much more organized manner. I like creating environments, Python and vanv. Basically, I'm using the library vanv, and the name of my environment is going to be env. Okay. Oops, sorry. Let's wait. Okay, let's activate it. Let me see. I think this one. Okay, right now I'm in my environment. I'm using the Python provided by the environment, not my own Python. Um, Let me first install Django. Pimp install Django. Django is a web framework, a little bit more complicated than Flask. It creates some like I think it's called boiler templates, like some prepared code. We'll see it together. Let me refer to my documents here. Okay, so this one is used to create an Django app. Let's create a Django app, and the name of our app is going to be app. Very original. Okay, so in my app, I have like one file which is managed.py. Essentially, this is the entry point of my Django application, and I have also a folder called app. And in this folder, there are some useful things. I mean, for example, setting startup is actually very useful if you are dealing with a huge project because you have to modify some of the things. But it may be the case that you don't really use it in your practice app. But if you are going to use Django in CmpE451, you will be using it without doubt. So let us look at the manage.py. As I said, this is the entry point. Let me run the Django app if I can. Let's see. So this is how we can run our Django app. Python managed.py run server. Right now it's going to give an error because I'm not in the folder, within the same folder of manage.py. As you can see, let's go there. cd app. Okay, let me run the server. Okay, now I've created, actually I run the server created by Django. Let's go to the link. It is on my local host and bind to the port 8000. This is the like default Django template when you don't do anything with your any modification on your Django application. This is the screen that you are going to encounter with. Okay, that's great. Let me close it. I use like Control C. Okay. Um, Let me create a requirements.txt file, which is essentially a txt file that lists the libraries that I'm using in my environment. Pip freeze greater than, it's like pipeline operation, requirements.txt. Okay. So let's have a look at that. Right now there are 4 libraries. Essentially it's Django and other libraries are used within the Django. So it's like their dependencies. Now, let me create a Docker file at this point. So, what do I want to do? Right now, I'm able to run this application on my local machine, right? And it's bind to the local host 8000. What I want to do is that I want to Dockerize this application so that the deployment of it becomes much more easier, and I can share this image. I can push this image to Docker Hub, or I can share this image with my friends in the same team, and they don't really need to install anything. I mean, for example, in CmpE352, okay, you are working in the backend team, and there is this guy from frontend. They are using React and lots of other libraries as well, and you want to test frontend. So, I mean, it's a very bad practice to test it using production environment from deployment, right? But even if without installing all these libraries that are used by frontend, you can run the frontend as a backend guy just using the image, just using the Dockerized version of it without installing anything on your machine, React or any other subsequent library. You can run it very easily. You can test it. You can bind it to localhost or any other address with any other port on your machine so that you can visualize what you were up to. So we want to Dockerize this application. We have to create a Dockerfile. There are different naming conventions at this point, but I will be using the very classical one, like Dockerfile with a capital D, like this. I'm using, I think, the Dockerfile extension of Visual Studio Code. That's why it's like puts some sort of a whale symbol here. You can use it by, if you are using Visual Studio, I really suggest you to use it because it makes life easier while you are dealing with Dockerfile. And of course, it also supports like highlighting of some of the commands in Dockerfile, so on and so forth. So, how to write a Dockerfile? Let me see. Actually, there is an example in your slides. My example is going to be a little bit different. Let me copy paste it and we can maybe go through it one by one. I have a container, and in this container, maybe my application is a Java application, so I have to use Java. And how to do that? Of course, like we are not expected to install everything from scratch. We can do it by installing some beforehand prepared images. For example, I'm using this one, Python, and the version of it or the tag of it is 3.8 Slimbuster, which suggests that there is this guy, maybe the Python team, I don't know. They created this image and pushed it to Docker Hub so that we can use it very easily for our Python applications. It basically provides us with Python 3.8. Okay, we installed Python. Now what? Now, first, we are going to define what is our working directory in container, not in our local machine. Right now, we are in the container, and all these commands, like, actually, these commands work in here, but you can, I mean, app simply means like there is some directory in container with the name app. And we want that directory to be our working directory. Okay, right now I'm working in that directory. I'm copying my requirements.txt to the container with to a file present in the container named as requirement.txt. Okay, then I'm installing my requirements. It simply means that I'm sending this information to the Docker and I'm to the Docker container, sorry, and I'm installing my dependencies, Django and Python.m, and of course other dependencies that are related to Django. Okay, this one is a little bit like off the topic actually. The thing is that when I'm using this one, I have to install tkdev to run my Django application. I found it out while I was playing it on my own previously. So if you are using Flask or something else, you may not need to use this one, but it simply suggests that I'm in my Docker container and I'm running something, and first I'm updating, then I'm installing a software, to put it simply. Okay, copy.copy. Copy simply means that first copy dot, I mean copy here, copy all the things present in here to the container, to the actually working directory, which is here, app. At this point, you may suggest like, okay, so why did we copy the requirements and then copy everything? You are right. Let's just replace it. Do it like it. It's the same. Right now, we copied everything, including requirements. Okay. And our last command is simply like when you do all these pre-processing steps, if it's correct word to use, install everything that is required for you to run the code in your container, then you are expected to run these commands basically, which is Python 3. Simply stands for Python, right? Like manage.py, what we did to run our Django application, run server again, and we are running our Django application on the address 0.0.0.0 and on the port 8000. Ports like different doors of an address. For example, in the same address, you can use the port 5000 maybe, or maybe 80, which is commonly used. 80 stands for 8080 actually. So, you can use anything. In this case, I'm using 800. Some of the ports are already bind. So, if you are saying something like this and it doesn't work, maybe it's the case that it's already an occupied port. You have to be careful with that. But classical ones are like 5000, 8000, 8080, I don't know, maybe 3000, I don't know. Let's stick to the 8000. Okay. What else? Let me show the Docker ignore as well. Let me create another file here, new file, dot. It's very similar to git ignore, by the way. In git ignore, what we are doing, we are putting some files to the git ignore so that while we are adding our files to the staging area, our git system ignores those files. For example, let's say I have a virtual environment and I don't really want to push that virtual environment to the repository, which is the common case. I put .env or the name of my virtual environment, it can be anything actually, to the .git ignore so that it's ignored. In our case, it's Docker ignore, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, as you can see, another symbol comes from Visual Studio. Let me put anything. Let me create a Django file, new file. Don't send me. Okay, and I'm putting this file. Please don't send me to container. I'm putting this file to the Docker ignore as follows. Don't send me. Like, very simple. Let me comment it as well. This is the command operation like in Python. A file that we don't want to send to the container. Okay. I have Docker ignore, Dockerfile. Okay, let's continue with creating our Docker image this time. We have prepared our Dockerfile. Let me refer to my commands here. To create a Docker image from a Dockerfile, we have to use Docker build. And I have provided two flags, tag and file. File actually stands for like, you have to provide the path of the Dockerfile, right? But you don't really need to use this in our case because we have already named it as Dockerfile with capital D, which is the standard format of it. And when we don't provide any file and just say dot, it looks for the files exactly named as Dockerfile in the current directory. If there are not more than one, then it takes that and uses for the building. So this is the one that I'm going to use. But of course, you may have different Docker files like this. For example, if you have a Docker file for dev and a Docker file for production, then you have to provide the file. So you have to say like file flag and then Dockerfile.prod, something like that, or the not relative path or the absolute path of it. Okay. In my case, I don't really have to differentiate them like this. Let me just rename it as Dockerfile. Okay. Also tag is used like some sort of an alias of an image so that we can refer to that image much more easily, which is something also used in Git as well, tag system, especially for versioning. You can use tags something like this. You can use a name, let's say Django App, then provide the version, Django App 1.0. Or you don't really need to provide the version, or if you don't provide the version, it's going to make it like this by default, latest. It assumes that you are providing the latest version of this repository. By the way, this thing is called repository. Of course, it's not the same as the repository we have in GitHub. Okay, let me run the command. Docker build tag. So what can I say? I think I'm going to name it as Django App, and my version is going to be 1.0, because why not? And I don't really have to provide file, but I have to provide dots, which suggests that look for the Docker file in this folder. Okay. So here it first pulls the Python 3.8 Slim Buster from the Docker library, which is like a repository or the like GitHub of Docker images. Then proceeds with setting the working directory at this stage. Then copies everything to the container and then install the requirements. This step is going to take some time, so most probably I will cut this part out. After completing this step, we will be continuing with creating our container. As you can see, we can see our image here, but we don't have any container yet. So in order to create a container from image, we should use the command called docker run. I have provided 3 flags. There are lots of flags with it, by the way, but I think these are the most useful for us for our use case. First one is detach. When you run your container, you can think of it like actually a process that's outputs something, and because of that, it occupies your terminal. It blocks your input, but we don't really want that to happen. I want to use my terminal after running the container, and in order to do that, I have to use it in detach mode. It simply means that run the container in the background. But of course, from here or even from some different command, using some different commands, you can go into the shell of the container and use its terminal, to put it simply. Okay, I provided my detach flag. My second flag is env. It's used to pass some environment variable to the container. Let's say you are using an environment variable in your code. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe using the environment variable path. And if your container doesn't have environment variable, then your code is not going to work, right? You can pass such variables using these flags, and the syntax is as follows: env, then path, and value of the variable. If you have lots of environment variables or some other variables, let's say passwords, maybe Amazon EC2 instance key, something like that, you may want to create an environment file called .env and put all these secret information here and put it to gitignore so that it is not pushed to the repository. And don't forget, actually, you don't really need to use this. In Docker Compose, we have another thing called env file, something like this. And you can provide your env file using this to the container so that you can pass multiple environment variables at once or secret information. Let me proceed with, okay, so I'm not going to use this, by the way, for this example. Publish. Okay, so there are 2 keywords actually, publish and expose. Expose is used for binding your application within the container to a port, because like if it's a web application, you have to open that in some address in a specific port, right? So expose doesn't have to do anything with the host, let it be the local machine or deployment server that is related to the container. Whereas publish is used to create a mapping between the port that is occupied within the container with the port that is going to be occupied in the host. So let me proceed with the example. For example, in this case, we map the port 80 in the container to the port 8080 in the local host or in the server. And the description states bind containers TCP port 80 to the host's port 8080. So you are able to open the application after running the container in 8080 in your machine. So in my case, I'm going to use something like this: detach publish 8000 to 8000. So it might be a bit confusing. This 8000 stands for the port of the container, and this 8000 stands for my port in my machine, in this computer. Okay, after I'm publishing, creating the mapping between the ports, I don't really have to provide anything else, just the name of the image. We can use the ID of the image or tag of it. I think using the tag is much more easier, so let me just use the tag, Django App. Don't forget to put the tag, let me rephrase. I'm using the repository name with the tag, something like this, Django App 1.0. Okay, so I'm creating my container from my image. Let's proceed. Okay, so a container is created, and it provided me with the ID of the container. There are different ways of visualizing the container. You can use the command line docker container ls, and we can see that it's right now running up for 12 seconds, which means that it is successfully running and the port mapping is done. So we can open it in our local machine, localhost 8000, and as you can see, right now we successfully dockerize our application. We run the container. The application that is run within the container is mapped
to my local host and the port 8000. This is not something that I run in my local machine. It is run in the container. So actually, it is the end of this video, but let me show the how to visualize the container as well. Okay, now we have created our container. Let's proceed with examining the container, actually, especially the inside content of it, like look at the folders or maybe run a command from terminal. There are different options to do that. You can use the command docker exec, but for the simplicity, you may prefer some like visual components like Docker desktop or maybe the Docker extension of Visual Studio. I will be showing the both. So for the Docker desktop, we have our image here, we have our container here. You should click on this one, view details, and we have different options, different tabs actually. We have logs tab, inspect, where we are able to see the environment variables in our container, terminal, and you can run any command you want in the terminal. Let's see where we are right now. Okay, we are right now in the working directory. We have our Dockerfile, our application, our database managed by and requirements.txt. I can do anything you want, like I can cd outside and ls. Right now I'm in another folder and I think I was occupying this one app. Let me go to the app again. Yes, I was in the app. I can run the code and so on. I can look at the files from here, which is I think a better visualization. So as you can see, I was at this point, I guess, within the app, within this folder, and I was able to see our database, Dockerfile managed by requirements. Be careful, we put one of our files to the Docker ignore. Therefore, it is not sent to Docker. And as you can see, this file don't send me, it was not sent to the container, which shows that we can hide our files from container if we don't want them to be sent to the container. There is also a stats section. Maybe this can be useful for you as well. So if you want to use Visual Studio extension, you should click on this button, and here you're able to see images and containers, and you can use images like this. For example, you can attach a shell, which is basically the terminal actually. Yeah, and this is the command you have to use to connect to the terminal. And here you can do anything you want. ls. Okay, we are in the application folder. You can also open it in our host as well. Open in browser. And as you remember, we mapped 8000 to the 8000 in our local machine. So right now I'm able to see that application is running in my container as well.